What is going on, my lovely YouTube viewers? Today we're talking about dark work. Dark work is, as far as I know, it's a term that I came up with. I found it in my notes one day. It was for writing my book, and I Googled it to see if I could find anyone else talking about it, but I couldn't. So as far as I know, I came up with it. But basically, I wanted a word for this sense of the work that you do later on in a project where you don't actually see any visual representation of it. So, uh, if you think about refactoring code where, you're changing around stuff, but you don't actually see any changes to the operation of it, or you think about, maybe you have to redo a sound engine or something and you have to like rewrite a bunch of stuff and change some stuff, but you're not actually seeing any positive change to it. And it seems like the deeper you get into a project, the longer you're working on your project, the more dark work you experience. And I talk about this in my book a bit, and I've mentioned it a few times on the channel in various videos as it relates to certain subjects. But I want to take a second to talk about it here because I wanted you guys to make sure that you're aware of it. So a lot of newer game developers that I see, myself included, when I started, I did the same thing. They assume that making games is gonna be awesome all the time. Um, and they even make things like and some people even say things like, if game making games isn't fun for you, you should stop making games. No, that's not true. Any creative endeavor ever is going to be hard for you sometimes. It just is. And dude, I've experienced this in so many different things, from art to music to poetry to games, all kinds of stuff. It's just like sometimes shit gets hard, man. And the deeper you are into a project, like the more dark work you see, and you actually interact with, and you do, especially in games, because there's a lot of programming dark work that goes into stuff. There's a lot of polish and tweaking near the end of a game that you there are changes that you need to make, but you may not necessarily see an addition. Like when you're publishing a game on Steam, for example, you got to do all the Steam options, you got to do controllers, custom controls, all that kind of stuff. That's dark work, right? You don't see any improvement to the game, but the stuff you gotta have there. So, um, a lot of people miss this, and then they get discouraged by it. A lot of people start with a game jam, for example. They'll start with a game jam, and they'll say, "Hey, on I started on Friday. By Saturday, I have the basics done. Sunday, I'm adding a bunch of polish to it. We launched. We made a game in 48 hours. Woohoo! If I made this game in 48 hours, like, dude, it would just take me a week or two to finish the whole thing, and boom, I'm done." But that's where the dark work kicks in, and uh, there are some people that try and turn game jams into longer term commercial projects, and they run into dark work. And then there are some people that never try and take their projects outside of the game jam scope, so they never experience dark work, but they always just assume it's easy. And so you have a lot of false information going around from people that have never done it, and then you have confusion going around from people that have experienced it but don't know they experienced it. They sometimes they may assume they're burned out because the working on their game isn't fun anymore, or sometimes they think that maybe they don't have a passion for making games anymore because shit's just not fun anymore. Well, that's why I wanted to talk about dark work, because dark work is one of those things that is in every project that you ever do. Any project that's any length of time, longer than a few days, where you've got to work on it for extended periods of time, is going to have some dark work, and you got to be prepared for doing stuff that you don't necessarily see the visual feedback for. What makes game jams so exciting is there's no time to fuck around, right? Like you gotta keep working on the game, and everything that you do, since the game scope is so small, hopefully, if you're doing game jams right, the game scope is so small that you're constantly on this high of building, and then you're on this like downward slope of publishing and getting everything ready for publish. So you never actually experience that big gap in between. That's just a bunch of dark work. And I want you guys to know, if you're watching this right now and you're at a stage in your project where there's a lot of stuff you have to do, and it just seems like you're losing motivation, it seems like you're losing um, your passion or whatever it is, just know that this is a normal part of the project. It's nothing's wrong with you, nothing's wrong with your passion or anything like that. You know, obviously, could be a different issue. It may not be dark work, so you may want to evaluate yourself and think about this stuff. But a lot of times, it's just you run out of fun stuff to do. You did all the fun stuff already, and now it's the boring stuff. Now it's the stuff that you don't see visual feedback for. Now it's the stuff that you have to do that's just not that exciting. And it's it can be demotivating in a way, like especially if you're one of those dudes that really tries to operate off of motivation and how you feel that day and whether you feel inspired. Dark work can kill that right away. It's one of the reasons why motivation is kind of scary, and discipline is what you need to actually get shit done and make games. So dark work is one of those things that comes up in any moderate sized project. And if you're starting a moderate sized project, you need to really evaluate the project and think about if you have the perseverance and the passion and the dedication and the discipline to continue that project through some of the dark times. One of the ways that I get past the slum of dark work is I try and save a lot of the feedback. Like if I'm doing level design, for example, which I'm doing now in Phylophobia, by the way. So my job right now is mainly just levels, pumping out levels. And it's level design can be fun, right? Like I would consider that one of the more fun parts about it. But one of the things that I have to do beyond that is I really have to work and tweak all the background settings and implement parallax and stuff like that. And that's a lot of, especially since the game's camera doesn't actually move. The parallax part of it is going to be a lot of dark work, and I know that, and I'm prepared for it. But I'm saving a lot of the testing, the feedback and stuff that I get from players for that dark work, so I can kind of be motivated by the things that people say, the feedback, watching people play it and all that, while I'm working on some of the other stuff. So I can kind of balance those. Essentially, like if you have a bunch of fun stuff and you have a bunch of boring stuff, maybe don't do all the fun stuff first. That's kind of what I'm saying. Maybe, if something is really motivating you, like getting other people to play my game is really motivating me. Having other people tell me what they think, having other people go through some of the content that I create is really motivating for me. So I try and keep some of that stuff for the dark work that I'm about to do. And now, granted, if you look at like a mechanical, robotic, what's the most efficient method? The most efficient method is just do one thing at a time and, do the feedback while we're working on level design, because then we got to go back and change the levels and modify stuff and make levels easier, make levels harder, whatever. But from a human scale, man, humans are not machines. Humans have other needs. They have emotional needs, motivational needs, all that kind of stuff. And you got to keep that in mind. Like, you're not a robot. You can't just always work in the most efficient, most effective way, because there are other, forces at play here. Your brain is filled with chemicals and depends on what you eat and how well you sleep and all that stuff. So like, you got to stop thinking of yourself like a robot and more like a human. And you got to understand that while this may not be the most effective or efficient method, or well, it may not be the most efficient method, it's definitely the most effective when it comes to being a human being, because it may take more time that way, but it's more sustainable. And I think sustainable should be the ultimate goal of everything you're trying to build, right? So that's all I got for you today. I just wanted to share that. I think that dark work is a big part of projects, and anybody that hasn't done a longer term project, maybe they don't know it exists. So they run into it and it's unexpected and they're like, oh, what is this shit? And they, think they may be losing motivation. But in reality, it's just, it's part of every project. It's just, it's a part of life. It's a part of how it all works. So I want to share that with you guys so you're prepared if you start your bigger project in the future. But I also wanted to be, kind of reinforce the idea in your brain that if you are working on a project, if you're working on something right now that maybe you feel isn't as fun when you started, that's probably because it's not. Because you're in that working on the dark work, you're doing the stuff that's just not visually interesting. You know, some stuff goes unnoticed visually or whatever. And so I wanted to chat with you guys. But once again, I'm Tim Ruswick. If you got any comments on this, please leave them below. I would love to hear what you guys think, as always. But once again, I'm Tim Ruswick, and I will see you tomorrow.